I never thought I'd be the kind of person who would get tangled up in a property war with my neighbors, but life has a way of surprising you. I've lived in my modest little home for over a decade. It wasn't a mansion, not even close, but it was mine. And to me, the crown jewels of my property were 3 towering oak trees that stood proudly along the side of my backyard. These trees weren't just plants to me. They were living history. They shaded my home in the blistering summer heat. They dropped acorns that the local squirrels loved to hoard, and they made my backyard a peaceful retreat. In fact, when I first bought the house, those trees were one of the biggest reasons I fell in love with the place. They were part of my life, my identity, and they carried so many memories. Birthday parties under their shade, family barbecues with laughter echoing under the leaves, and countless evenings spent swaying in my hammock watching the branches move with the breeze. Those trees were more than wood and leaves. They were home. So imagine my devastation when one morning I woke up to the deafening roar of chainsaws. At first, I thought maybe the city had some maintenance project going on nearby. But the sound was coming from far too close, right outside my bedroom window. My heart dropped and I bolted outside, still in my pajamas. What I saw made my blood boil. My neighbors, let's call them Richard and Karen because honestly, those names fit them perfectly, were standing there, smirking, as workers chopped down my beautiful oaks like they were nothing more than weeds in a field. I screamed, "What the hell are you doing? Those are my trees!" But Karen just crossed her arms, wearing this smug little smile that made me want to scream louder. Richard didn't even look guilty. He casually shrugged and said, "We thought they were on our property. They were blocking our sunlight and frankly they made our yard look messy. So we decided to take care of it." Take care of it? My blood was boiling so hot I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Those weren't weeds. Those weren't some random bushes. Those were my trees, and without a single word to me, they decided to butcher them to stumps. The sound of the chainsaws still rang in my ears as I stared at the fallen giants. All the years it took for those trees to grow tall and strong, gone in minutes because my neighbors wanted more sunlight. My hands were shaking, my throat dry, but I managed to choke out, "You're going to regret this." Karen laughed. She actually laughed like I was some child throwing a tantrum. "Oh, calm down," she said, rolling her eyes. "It's not a big deal. You'll thank us when your yard looks better without those ugly things." Ugly things? Those trees were the pride of my yard. I was furious, but I knew yelling wasn't going to get me anywhere. These people were arrogant, self-centered, and clearly didn't care about anyone but themselves. I went back inside, slammed the door, and sat down at my kitchen table, still trembling. I wanted revenge, badly, but I also knew I couldn't act rashly. If I was going to get them back, it had to be in a way that was legal, calculated, and devastating. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the stumps where my trees had once stood. I could hear Karen's mocking voice, Richard's smug dismissal. They thought they could just do whatever they wanted because they were bold enough to act first. They thought I was powerless, and that thought alone kept me awake until dawn. The next day, I made a decision. I called a professional surveyor. If Richard and Karen were bold enough to destroy my property, then I was going to find out exactly where the property lines were. Part of me had always suspected their fancy new fence, the one they bragged about and decorated with expensive lights, wasn't entirely on their land. They had it built not long after they moved in, and I remember thinking at the time that they were awfully close to my side. But I didn't want to start a war, so I let it slide. Now, I had no intention of letting anything slide. The surveyor came out 2 days later, walking the yard with precision tools, taking measurements, and marking the land with little flags. I watched carefully as he moved closer and closer to their fence. Finally, he looked at me with a raised brow and said, "Well, here's the issue. Their fence isn't on their land. It's actually about 3 feet into your property line." I nearly laughed. 3 feet doesn't sound like much, but when you're dealing with property, it's a big deal. It meant part of their precious backyard, part of their garden, their patio space, their landscaping, was sitting on my land. Legally, it was mine. The trees they destroyed? Mine. And now, the very space they thought they were improving by cutting them down? Also mine. A rush of satisfaction coursed through me. For the first time since that horrible morning, I felt hope. These people thought they had humiliated me, stripped me of something I loved. But karma? Karma was patient, and karma had just handed me a gift. I didn't confront them right away. No, that would have been too easy. Instead, I quietly gathered all the documentation. The surveyor's report, photos of the destroyed trees, copies of my property deed. I wanted an ironclad case before I made my move, and when I had everything I needed, I marched down to City Hall. The clerk at the zoning office raised her brows as I laid out the evidence. She didn't even hesitate. "They'll have to move the fence," she said firmly. "It's a clear encroachment. You're well within your rights to demand it." Hearing those words was like music to my ears. Weeks of frustration, sleepless nights, and anger melted into anticipation. I filed the complaint officially, and the process began. Letters were sent. Inspectors came out, and soon enough Richard and Karen received the notice. Their fence had to be torn down, and their backyard legally reverted to its proper boundary, meaning they were losing 3 whole feet of land. When the contractors showed up to dismantle the fence, I made sure to be outside, leaning casually against my porch, sipping iced tea like it was the best day of my life. Karen stormed out, her face red, shouting at the workers, "You can't do this! This is our yard!" But the foreman just held up the official paperwork and shrugged. "Ma'am, it's not. It belongs to your neighbor." The look on her face was priceless. Richard came out next, trying to argue, threatening to call his lawyer, but the city had already spoken. Their expensive fence came down piece by piece, and with it went their newly landscaped garden, the one they had spent thousands on just weeks earlier. The fresh flowers, the neatly arranged stones, the decorative lights, all ripped apart as their backyard shrank before their eyes. I stood there watching, not saying a word, because honestly, I didn't need to. Their shocked expressions, their frantic shouting, their helplessness, it was all the revenge I could have asked for. They thought cutting down my trees was a victory, but in the end, I took their backyard. And the best part? It was all completely legal. That night, as I sat on my porch, staring at the now larger stretch of my yard, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. The stumps of my trees still hurt to look at, but I knew I had honored them in the best way possible, by making sure the people who destroyed them paid a price. Justice doesn't always come fast. Sometimes it takes patience, planning, and a little faith in the system. But when it comes, oh, it's sweet. My neighbors learned the hard way that you can't just take what isn't yours. And as for me, I learned that silence can be far more powerful than screaming. So if you ever find yourself dealing with neighbors who think they can walk all over you, remember this. Karma might take its time, but when it arrives, it hits harder than you can imagine. And every time I look out at my bigger backyard, I smile, knowing Richard and Karen will never forget the day they messed with the wrong neighbor.